In early 1945, the war situation developed not necessarily to Germany's advantage, especially the surface fleet of the Kriegsmarine, wherein a majority of the large surface vessels had been sunk previously. Still, there were remnants from a bygone era of German naval history, as there were battleships from the Kaiser's battle fleet left in service with the German Navy, albeit pre-dreadnoughts, but still battleships from the Kaiser Marine. The range from the decrepit and damaged Schleswig-Holstein to the Hessen, who had been transformed into a radio-controlled gunnery ship, to the very interesting Schön, who at this time was in frontline active duty, assisting in the defense of Baltic ports, much like other ships we've discussed in the series. Like those other ships, though, the remnants of the Kaiser's once mighty navy did meet its end, and in today's video, we'll discuss 3 of those battleships. The first question, why were these battleships still around? Neat answering is, why were these vessels still in service? Well, following the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, the new Reichsmarine was restricted in what ships they could have in service. According to Article 181, Germany was limited to having in commission 6 pre-dreadnought battleships, 6 light cruisers, 12 destroyers, and 12 torpedo boats. Any surplus had to be put in reserve or converted for merchant use. Where? Taking from Aden Dodson in the Kaiser's battle fleet, German capital ships 1871 to 1918. Right in the autumn of 1919, the 6 battleships were seen as the future German battle fleet. Hannover, Schön, Schleswig-Holstein, Hessen, and Ales were towed from Kiel to Wilhelmshaven, while in March 1920, the Allies permitted the retention of an extra pair of battleships as well as 2 extra cruisers, 4 more destroyers, and 4 torpedo boats, 30 in reserve with guns aboard. Article 181 had previously required that all ships in reserve be fully disarmed. The additional pair. Okay, nothing else for you answering, so now I'll just edit this part with all the equipment. Use the text along with this and we're done. Were Poon and Lingen, although both were laid up in their unarmed depot ship states respectively at Kiel and Volshaven. Thus, all survivors of the Braun and Deutschland classes, except Deutschland herself, which was sold for scrap, were available for potential service. However, resources were never sufficient to have more than 4 fully operational at one time, with neither of the ex-depot ships ever reactivated. Slowly but surely, each of the battleships returned to service. Some, as we shall soon see, were certainly in no condition to operate as warships in this. We'll discuss each of these ships and looking at Schleswig-Holstein and Schön somewhat together, as their careers are SMS Hessen similar. First on our list is SMS Hessen, a vessel that started life as a normal battleship. Hessen was part of the Brown Flag class of battleships, armed with a main battery of 428 CCM guns, in common with other pre-dreadnoughts, a variety of smaller caliber guns, including 17 centimeters and 8.8 cm guns, all being propelled at a stately top speed of 18 knots. Hessen was commissioned in September 1905, and only a short time later, in 1906, was HMS Dreadnought birthed into the world, making Hessen obsolete. Nevertheless, the battleship stayed in commission and went on to take part in the First World War, and even participated in the Battle of Jutland. In this, Hessen did not do anything of note during the battle. After the battle, she was decommissioned and disarmed, being converted into an accommodation vessel for submarine crews. Here, she was given a nickname. On her side, she was painted with the warning SMS Clat, or SMS slowest possible speed, which meant an utmost reduction of speed for any passing vessel to not damage her mowing lines due to the swell or suction effects. After the war and the scuttling of the high seas fleet, the new German Navy, the Reichsmarine, was allowed to keep a limited number of vessels, including some of these obsolete. Pre-dreadnought battleships, including the Hessen recommissioned into the new Reichsmarine in January of 1925, and was rearmed, including her full 17-centimeter battery, and the addition of 4 casemate torpedo tubes forward and aft. She also had her boilers replaced by oil-fired water tube units, and several other upgrades and changes. As compared to her sisters, Hessen operated with the new German Navy in various roles, venturing around European waters and receiving upgrades until the early 1930s, when she was decommissioned in November of 1934 as more modern vessels entered the fleet, with the rise of the Nazi Party in the revitalization of the German Navy. The KS Marina would need target practice to account for all the new vessels being planned and constructed. This is where things start to get interesting for Hessen, as she was struck from the naval register. Again, taking from Dodson as German rearmament gathered pace, the fleet's target practice requirements were no longer satisfied. As a result, Hessen was taken in hand at Wilhelmshaven during 1935 to 1937 to be rebuilt as an additional radio-controlled target ship. Hessen was stripped down to the bare hull and a new forart was constructed, lengthening the ship by 10 meters. All existing machinery was removed, then replaced by 3 modern high-press boilers and 2 sets of turbines, producing 25,000 shaft horsepower for a maximum speed of 20.3 knots. The only armament was a single 50-centimeter torpedo tube installed, experimental purposes, although a pair of 10.5 cm AA guns were added after 1940. Still, the protection was reinforced by additional modern armor of WH quality steel to allow her to withstand the 38 cm guns of the Bismarck-class vessels then under construction. The forward bar the ship was used to house the capstan, while the AF housed the ship's control mechanism, which could be operated remotely from the control vessel Blitz. Hessen's modest bridge work after the
deckhouse supported the funnel. The ship was utterly unrecognizable from her former self, and only recesses fore and after of the former main deck secondary battery gave any glimpses of her origin. She served in this role from 1937 on, even through the duration of the Second World War, with only slight deviations from this role during the war. In any case, the former battleship
was one of the few German warships intact after the Second World War, and was included among the ships that were to be divided up amongst the Allies by the Potsdam Agreement falling. Together with her control vessel Blitz, the Hessen was ceded to the Soviet Union following the Second World War, in company with the light cruiser Enberg, on January 2, 1946. She left for the Soviet Union in June of that year. She was recommissioned as the Cell and continued to serve with the Blitz, now Vistal, until 1960, when she was stricken and broken up. Almost 60 years since the former Hessen keel had been laid, she had been in active service in 4 fleets and 2 navies. A very interesting and odd career for a SMS Schleswig-Holstein battleship. The next ship we will discuss is Schleswig-Holstein. This Lenian ship or battleship was certainly from a different era, being part of the 1905 building program of the Imperial German Navy. Schleswig-Holstein saw service throughout the Great War and even participated in several actions, including the Battle of Jutland. Following the war, she was one of the outdated pre-dreadnoughts that the new Reich Marine was allowed to keep. According to the Treaty of Versailles in the interwar period, she was modernized and taken from Dodson again. The new flagship had been more extensively modified during her 1924-1926 refit at Wilhelmshaven than any of the earlier battleships, with her appearance significantly altered. A wholly new tubular foremast of the type first fitted in the Kiegs and now refined in the cruiser Midden was installed with an enclosed control top housing a 6-meter rangefinder, another of which was installed on the enlarged bridgework. The main mast was initially unaltered, but the top gallant mast was removed and the top mast reduced in height in 1927, while the searchlight's AB breasts, the fore funnel, were moved after to the forward side of the second funnel, the casing of which was consequently raised to the same level of that of the fore funnel. The after superstructure was much enlarged and extended forward to provide accommodation for the CNC and his staff. As regards the ship's armament, only the 28 cm battery was reinstalled. By the time that Schleswig-Holstein was due for refit, all 88 Exton 17 cm guns had been otherwise allocated. Instead, Schleswig-Holstein and Schön received a secondary battery of 15 cm guns from batches originally allocated to Vid, Bach, Zingen, Schaben, and Lahn. The former tertiary battery was reduced to 8 guns on the superstructure, the now usual 4-case. Mate torpedo tubes were also installed on January 31, 1926. Schleswig-Holstein relieved Brown as fleet flagship, and she was paid off for the last time in Schleswig-Holstein's interwar service. She was to train the ERS of the German Navy, and one of the key roles of the new Navy was showing the flag. So she ventured around Scandinavia, in the Mediterranean multiple times, as well as trips to the Americas. She also received numerous refits that further modernized her appearance and weaponry, making her a useful asset to the NS Marina, of which, on Friday, August 25, 1939, the elderly pre-dreadnought battleship Schleswig-Holstein fired her guns near the port of Danzig, quickly followed by the German national anthem. The sailors on board the ship wore their dress whites and stood rigidly at attention, as the ship, guided by tugs, passed through a canal into the heart of the port. On the waterfront, men, women, and children stood and watched as the ship passed them by, many of whom waved handkerchiefs and flags or even saluted the ship Schlesien, adorned with her flags, came into the free city ostensibly for a goodwill visit to commemorate the 25th anniversary of the loss of the German cruiser Mager in the Gulf of Finland. In reality, as tensions flared over the Polish corridor, SX, as she was called by her crew, was there to stiffen the resolve of the people of Danzig, and if war broke out, use her 428 cm guns and secondary armament against Polish positions in the city. Within days, this festive-like atmosphere in the city completely changed as the world was plunged into the depths of the Second World War, in part due to the guns of that antiquated battleship. Now, I've covered the actions of Schleswig-Holstein and Danzig in another video, link in the description. But suffice it to say, Schleswig-Holstein fired some of the first shots of the Second World War. The battleship, having done its job in Danzig, was not finished with its part in the Polish campaign, heading to the Hela Peninsula, joined by her sister ship, Sean. The guns of the two elderly battleships pounded Hela Peninsula for several days from September 23rd onward, taking from Gilhar in the gathering storm. The naval war in Northern Europe, September 1939 to April 1940. Smoke and dust from the exploding shells gave the impression of brutal efficiency, but results were rather limited. Quite to the contrary. Schleswig-Holstein was damaged by return fire from the coastal batteries, after which the battleships withdrew, continuing the shelling from some 9 mil distance, reducing the effect further. The Stukas were sent to finish the job, though the battleships going on to assist in the invasion of Denmark later in 1940, and returned to training duty following the successful invasion. Later on, she went to see some other bombardment missions and carry out training cruises for the majority of her wartime service. But the old battleship was taken into the Deutsche VK dock at Gettenhofen, or today, Ginia, for conversion work into a convoy escort ship, with the removal of her existing secondary battery and anti-aircraft guns. She was to carry at least 6 10.5 cm guns, 10 4 cm Bowers, 4 3.7 cm guns, and as many as 22 cm guns. New fire control systems and rangefinders were going to be fit to the ship as well. Not only that, her machinery was going to get a refit, new pumps and new DEGS equipment as well. But the refit did not happen, and the armament changes most likely didn't occur, as on December 18, 1944, while the ship was still in dock, she was heavily damaged during a raid by the RAF, with one bomb exploding in the port engine room, another one of midships, and a third passing through without exploding. On March 21, 1945, as the Soviets approached the city, her crew scuttled the damaged ship in shallow water. This is where things start to get interesting, as for many years into my confusion, it was believed that the ship was scrapped in place. However, in the early 1990s, researchers found that the Soviets had towed her back to Tallinn in the spring of 1946. It was reported that the Soviets were going to use her as a training ship, target ship, or some other use. She was sunk in the Gulf of Finland, and whether she was given an official name isn't clear, although some sources claim she was given the name Borodino, this rather prestigious name being unlikely to gain. Some more clarity on this situation? Let's look at spoilers of war, the fate of boards. Enemy fleets after 2 world wars by Aidan Dodson and Serena Kahn, where they write, in addition to these 2 ships, the Italian Giulio Cesi, in the Finnish Vor, the USSR was in possession of several other capital ships, all of which were placed in Category C, and were thus due for destruction by August 15, 1946. This was not achieved until October of the following year, when the destruction of these vessels was certified. In the interim, the Soviet authorities had indeed toyed with the idea of retaining and repairing some vessels, which Holland added to the Navy in March 1946 and Graf Zeppelin in September 1945 as a potential trial ship for future Soviet-built aircraft carriers. However, their poor condition, leaving aside the international obligations, made this untenable, and all ships in question were directed in March 1947 to be destroyed. They go into report that Schleswig-Holstein was beached in shallow water off the Estonian coast at the mouth of the Gulf of Finland for long-term use as a target on June 26, of which I believe you can still find some photos of the ship in the area. It's worth a Schlesien Google. Finally, our last ship on our list is Schlesien. Now, I won't go into too much detail about her in war service. Just know she was the last of the battleships to recommission, and like her sisters, was modernized in terms of equipment, appearance, and machinery. We'll also detail a little bit more of what Schleswig-Holstein did during the war, because their services were very similar. Where to get into her service in the Second World War, we'll take a look at Dodson again. Both Schleswig-Holstein and Schoen undertook operations in support of the occupation of Poland, before reverting to their training roles in November. Early war modifications included the addition of twin 37mm AA mountings on Schoen's Focal, and after turret, January to March 1940, saw them undertaking icebreaking duties, while in April they were used operationally once again during the Danish part of Operation Vasa Ubang, the other part being the invasion of Norway. With the completion of these operations, the 2 ships returned to the Baltic, both being laid up in care and maintenance at Gettenhofen, Guinea, in August. By then, their secondary batteries had been landed for installation, and auxiliary cruisers that were being then fitted out at that same time, Schleswig-Holstein also had all of her anti-aircraft guns removed, redeployment ashore in the defense of Hamburg, although Schlesien only lost her 37mm guns. Schlesien, along with her sister, were reactivated for icebreaking duties in January 1941. And then brought back into full commission in May as part of the preparation for Operation Barbarossa. In this, Schlesien and Schleswig-Holstein were deployed as floating batteries off the Danish coast to guard against any breakout of the Red Fleet in response to the German attack. This was a short-lived return to service, as Schlesien was laid up in October. Winter once again brought the elderly battleships back for icebreaking duty. Because of that icebreaking duty, Schlesien wasn't part of the spring 1943 order for the deactivation of all heavy ships in the aftermath of the Battle of the Barents Sea. In the spring of 1943, she received more guns as she was used in training duties once again during this period. She was mostly stationary, although with some cruises at the end of the year with the sinking of the Schöner, the reactivation of the Schleswig-Holstein was contemplated instead of the Schoen, and it was decided that Schoen was not as practical because Schleswig-Holstein retained some of her coal-firing boilers due to the worsening oil situation. The oil situation wasn't the only thing worsening, as Dodson writes. However, both ships' careers as training ships would soon be overtaken by Germany's deteriorating military situation. The need to protect convoys in the Baltic from air attack led to both Schoen and Schleswig-Holstein being taken in hand towards the end of 1944 for a major enhancement of their anti-aircraft batteries, as well as general modernization of equipment, including new generators to serve as convoy escort ships. As refitted Schlesien emerged at the end of 1944 with her 4 old 8.8 cm guns on the after superstructure replaced by 10.5 cm weapons, with an additional pair AB Brest. The bridge and the light anti-aircraft battery increased, as mentioned in her section. Schleswig-Holstein was immobilized in December 1944 and therefore had no significant use. Schlesien, on the other hand, could be quite useful in the defense of the Baltic by early 1945 with the destruction of the Teapet and Schleswig. Hohenstein was the last big-gun battleship left to the coast marina, assisting in the defenses of places like Danzig and Gettenhofen. As she used her big guns to try to save off the advancing Red Army, other vessels were entrusted with the care of refugees and wounded. However, even her guns weren't enough. Eventually, she met her fate as Dodson and KWR. Thus, as the war entered its last weeks, the only vessel above destroyer size still operational was the ancient battleship Schön, which continued bombardments off what was left of Germany's Baltic coast. But even the old battleship's days were numbered. On May 3rd, she struck a mine off Pund and grounded while and towed towards Swam Mund by the destroyer Z-39, escorted by Z-38. For a short while, she was used as an anti-aircraft battery, but when the port was evacuated the following day, she was scuttled and settled in shallow water. The wreck of the venerable battleship was gradually broken up after the war, only scantily submerged debris being left after 1957, the remnants of the Kaiser's battle conclusion fleet. Fighting in the Second World War is certainly an odd and interesting topic that rarely gets discussed. One thing I will mention at the end is the battle cruise of Gabin, as she was still in service in Turkey during this time, and continued to see service into the 1950s. A story for another day, perhaps. Thank you all for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, as it'll help the channel to grow. And until next time, my friends, have a great week.